A famous Harvard law professor thinks he can embarrass Denzel Washington on live TV. Big mistake. What happened next left the entire legal world speechless and changed everything we thought we knew about who really belongs in America's courtrooms. Alan Dershowitz sat in his fancy office, surrounded by leather-bound books, feeling pretty confident about himself. This 85-year-old legal celebrity was about to go head-to-head with Denzel Washington on CNN, and he thought it would be easy. After all, he's Harvard royalty, right? He's defended famous people, written best-selling books, and commanded huge speaking fees for decades. But Denzel? Well, Dershowitz saw him as just another Hollywood actor playing lawyer. He had no idea what was coming. The tension had been building for months. Dershowitz kept making snide comments about celebrity activists and politician lawyers, who were supposedly dumbing down the legal profession. Everyone knew he was talking about people like Denzel, even though he never said names directly. So when CNN decided to put them both on a live panel about the future of legal practice in America, it was like watching a car crash in slow motion. You knew something big was about to happen. The show started normally enough. Anderson Cooper guided the conversation, both men stayed polite, and for the first 20 minutes, everything seemed fine. Then Cooper asked the question that broke everything wide open. Professor Dershowitz, you've been critical of lawyers entering politics. Do you think legal training actually helps in political roles? Dershowitz leaned back with that smug look he's perfected over decades. Well, Anderson, I think we need to distinguish between lawyers who happen to be in politics and politicians who happen to have law degrees. He glanced at Denzel's video feed with obvious disdain. Real legal practice requires years of complex casework, appellate experience, constitutional analysis. It's not something you can just pick up along the way. If you knew Denzel Washington, really knew him, you might have caught the tiny shift in his expression, the slight narrowing of his eyes, the calm before the storm. Cooper sensed the tension and pushed further. Are you suggesting that some political figures aren't qualified to speak on legal matters? That's when Dershowitz really went for it. His voice dripped with condescension as he said, I'm saying that arguing before the Supreme Court is very different from grandstanding in committee hearings. One requires legal scholarship. The other requires performance skills. The word performance hit like a slap. Legal Twitter exploded. Lawyers across the country stopped what they were doing to tune in. And Denzel? He just sat there, taking notes on his legal pad, completely calm. Cooper tried to balance things out. Mr. Washington has an extensive legal background before stepping into public life. Are you familiar with his casework? Dershowitz waved his hand like he was swatting a fly. I'm sure he's handled his share of local matters, Anderson. But let's be honest about the difference between small-time civil rights work and the kind of constitutional law that actually shapes this country. That's when Denzel finally spoke, his voice measured and deadly calm. Professor Dershowitz, could you clarify what you mean by small-time civil rights work? Dershowitz, now in full professor mode, leaned forward. I mean cases that might matter to individuals, sure, but they don't create precedent. They don't shape constitutional interpretation. They don't appear in law school textbooks. Denzel nodded, writing something down. And in your view, what kind of legal experience should qualify someone to speak on constitutional matters? The professor perked up, thinking he finally had someone listening. Supreme Court cases, federal appellate work, academic scholarship, the kind of experience that comes from years of deep legal thought, not just a law degree and some Hollywood prestige. Then he delivered the line that would haunt him forever. Let's be honest, Mr. Washington. You've never argued a real case that mattered. Being an actor doesn't make you a lawyer. The silence that followed felt like an eternity. Denzel didn't blink, didn't frown, didn't raise his voice. He just smiled, that controlled, steady smile that said, "You just made a terrible mistake." Cooper tried to cool things down, but Denzel raised a calm hand. Actually, Anderson, if you don't mind, I'd like to respond to Professor Dershowitz's remarks. He reached for a folder that had been sitting beside him the entire time. The movement was slow, deliberate, like a chess master touching the queen. Everyone watching felt it. Whatever was in that folder was about to change everything. Dershowitz leaned back, satisfied. He thought he'd won. He had no idea what was coming. Denzel opened the folder with surgical precision. He looked straight into the camera and said, "Professor Dershowitz, you asked about real cases, cases that create precedent, that appear in law school textbooks." He pulled out the first document. "Let me introduce you to Thompson versus Dallas Housing Authority, argued before the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals in 2019. Familiar with it?" The flicker was immediate. Dershowitz's expression faltered. Across the country, lawyers scrambled to look it up. "The case redefines Section 8 housing discrimination standards," Denzel continued. "It's now cited in housing law courses at 17 law schools, including yours." He paused, looking directly at the camera. "I'm curious, Professor. Is that one in your syllabus this semester?" The first crack in Dershowitz's armor. He shifted uncomfortably, but Denzel wasn't done. "Or maybe you're more familiar with Rodriguez versus the Texas Department of Public Safety, which I brought to the Supreme Court in 2020. Another page, another devastating blow. The court's decision in that case changed how states implement traffic stop procedures nationwide. The opinion cited my brief 14 times. Across America, law firm partners dropped what they were doing. Harvard law students were frantically texting their professors. Legal Twitter was going absolutely crazy with screenshots flying everywhere. Dershowitz tried to jump in. "Mr. Washington, I'm sure these are—" "I'm not finished, Professor." The voice was still calm, but now there was steel in it. "Since you mentioned Supreme Court experience, let me ask you something. How many times have you argued before the court this decade?" The question hung in the air like a sword. Dershowitz blinked, but before he could answer, Denzel continued. "I've argued 3 cases before the court since 2018. All 3 resulted in unanimous or near-unanimous decisions. All 3 are taught in constitutional law courses. All 3 expanded civil rights protections for ordinary Americans." He held up a thick brief. "This is Williams versus Federal Bureau of Prisons, decided just last year. The court adopted our framework for prison health care rights. Chief Justice Roberts personally praised our reasoning in the majority opinion." Cooper was frozen. Scholars were live fact-checking every claim Denzel made, and every single one was checking out. But Denzel still wasn't done. "Professor, you mentioned that real legal work requires constitutional scholarship. So I'm curious, when exactly was your last peer-reviewed article in a constitutional law journal?" Dershowitz was visibly squirming now. "Because since 2020, I've published 4 peer-reviewed pieces in major constitutional law journals. They've been cited in over 60 federal court decisions. The Yale Law Journal called my work on Fourth Amendment protections groundbreaking." He gave that classic Denzel look, the one that says, "Are you sure you want to keep going?" "But you're right about one thing, Professor. There is a difference between lawyers and politicians who happen to have law degrees. The difference is real lawyers don't stop practicing law even when they serve the people." The legal community watching live went completely silent. In less than 5 minutes, Denzel Washington had systematically destroyed every arrogant assumption Dershowitz had thrown at him. Then he reached for one final document. "This is a letter from the American Bar Association recognizing my civil rights litigation as exemplary of the highest standards in legal practice. It's signed by 12 federal judges, including 2 Supreme Court justices." The camera cut to Dershowitz. That trademark smugness was completely gone. What remained was something between disbelief and quiet defeat. And then Denzel delivered the knockout punch, the line people would quote for years. "So when you say I've never argued a real case that mattered, I have to ask, are you confusing me with someone else, or do you just not know a damn thing about federal civil rights law? Crushing silence. Cooper looked back and forth between the two men, fully aware that everything had just changed. Dershowitz tried to recover. Well, of course, civil rights work is important, but Denzel raised a hand. Let me stop you right there, Professor. Let me save you from digging this hole any deeper. He reached for another folder. I reviewed your recent case history before tonight's panel. Would you like me to go over your win rate in federal appeals over the last 5 years? Checkmate. The implication was crystal clear. Denzel had come prepared with receipts, not just about himself, but about Dershowitz too. And what he'd found wasn't pretty. For the first time in decades, Alan Dershowitz was genuinely speechless on live television. Before we continue with what happened next, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe, because this story is far from over, and the aftermath was even more incredible than the debate itself. The legal world erupted immediately. At Harvard, law students created a group chat called Washington vs. Dershowitz that hit 500 members within an hour. At Yale, Stanford, and Columbia, professors were already updating their syllabi to include this as required viewing. The hashtag Washington receipts trended nationwide. Legal Twitter flooded with screenshots of his cases, law journal excerpts, his bar association letter. Every single claim he'd made checked out completely. Professor Sarah Martinez at UC Berkeley tweeted, "I've taught constitutional law for 15 years. What I saw tonight wasn't just a debate. It was a dismantling, a masterclass in legal argument." Federal Judge Maria Rodriguez posted on LinkedIn, "I've read Denzel Washington's briefs. His legal work speaks for itself. What you saw tonight, that's Tuesday for him." But not everyone was happy. Conservative commentator Jonathan Hayes posted, "This was a setup. Washington clearly came prepared to ambush a respected scholar. Unprofessional." The backlash was immediate and brutal. Lawyers across the political spectrum responded, "Coming prepared with facts is not an ambush. It's called being a damn good lawyer." Meanwhile, Dershowitz's phone wouldn't stop ringing. His publicist, agent, and book team all asking the same question: how do we spin this? Harvard Law released a careful statement. Professor Dershowitz's comments tonight do not reflect the views of Harvard Law School regarding the value of civil rights practice to the American legal tradition. Translation: they were backing away from him. Denzel's phone was lighting up too, but for all the right reasons. Law firms were calling with consulting offers. 3 law schools reached out about visiting professorships. The ACLU announced a new civil rights fellowship in his name. But the most powerful moment came from his past. Back in LA, a group of Denzel's former law classmates held a watch party. Local news captured their reactions. "We always knew Denzel was sharp," said Maria Gonzalez, who studied with him at Forum Law. "But watching him take apart someone who probably never thought twice about lawyers from our school, that was beautiful." Another classmate added, "Guys like Dershowitz think excellence only comes in an Ivy League wrapper. Denzel just proved it comes from grind, discipline, and giving a damn about your clients." The clip went viral, adding a whole new layer to the story. This wasn't just about legal expertise, it was about class versus character, privilege versus purpose. On TikTok, lawyers began posting breakdowns, analyzing every argument Denzel made with frame-by-frame reverence. On Instagram, legal accounts posted infographics detailing the cases he cited. Even LinkedIn was flooded with analysis and open admiration. Dr. Michael Roberts, a legal studies professor at Howard University, posted a Twitter thread that caught fire. 50,000 retweets in under a day. What we witnessed tonight was more than a debate. It was a masterclass in how institutional bias blinds us to excellence when it doesn't come in an Ivy League package. He continued, "Washington didn't just defend himself. He exposed how elite legal culture routinely dismisses phenomenal work because it doesn't look like what they're used to." The thread ended with a gut punch. Dershowitz made the classic mistake, confusing credentials with competence, pedigree with performance. Tonight he learned that mistake can end careers. But maybe the most meaningful reactions came from young lawyers of color. People who saw their own uphill battles reflected in Denzel's journey. Attorney Maria Santos tweeted, "Every lawyer who didn't go Ivy League, who worked twice as hard to prove themselves, who's been underestimated in every room, tonight was for us." The hashtag not your traditional lawyer exploded. Lawyers began sharing their own stories about being overlooked or dismissed because of their background, their school, or their practice area. Recruiters reported a spike in interest from diverse candidates. Law school applications from first-generation students surged. The Washington effect was more than a moment. It was becoming a movement. Then something unexpected happened. 3 weeks later, a group of Dershowitz's former Harvard students published an open letter in the Harvard Law Review titled, "Learning from Failure," a response to recent events. It was signed by 43 lawyers who had all studied under Dershowitz, and it was remarkable. As students, we were taught to revere academic brilliance. His methods were presented as the gold standard. But recent events have forced us to confront a truth. We were never taught to value humility, preparation, or practical mastery over performance. Then came the line that sent shockwaves through the legal world. "We write this not to condemn our professor, but to admit that the most important lessons sometimes come from voices we were taught to overlook." The letter called out how prestige had been placed above substance, how many of them had learned more from courtroom veterans like Washington than they ever had in elite lecture halls. We urge legal academia to recognize that excellence takes many forms, that lawyers who make the biggest difference in real people's lives often do so far from the marble halls of institutional prestige. 3 days later, the Harvard Law Review published an editorial titled "Excellence Beyond Elitism." They didn't name names, but everyone knew what it was about. Dershowitz scrambled to control the narrative. He published a blog post titled "Misunderstandings in Context," claiming his remarks had been taken out of context. Legal journalists fact-checked it within hours. The verdict was swift. There was no context that saved him. Then came the investigations. Reporters started digging into Dershowitz's recent case record. The numbers weren't pretty. His federal appeals win rate had dropped sharply. Several high-profile clients had quietly walked away. The final blow came in a feature article in American Lawyer magazine with the headline, "The Emperor's New Arguments." The piece revealed that Dershowitz had lost his last 4 federal appeals, with judges in 2 cases specifically calling out his briefs as poorly researched and lacking legal foundation. One unnamed federal judge was quoted bluntly, "There's a difference between being a famous lawyer and being a good one. Fame doesn't win cases. Preparation and legal reasoning do." The article also revealed that Dershowitz was charging clients $2,500 an hour for legal work that judges were rejecting outright. One former client said anonymously, "We paid him $4 million for a brief the court called frivolous." Meanwhile, lawyers like Washington are winning constitutional cases with arguments that actually hold up in court. The legal community's response was swift and merciless. 3 major law firms quietly removed Dershowitz from their of counsel listings. Speaking bureaus reported a sharp drop in demand. Harvard Law announced that his constitutional law seminar would be restructured next semester. Translation: "We're minimizing his role." Meanwhile, Denzel's team made a very different announcement. He would be teaching a masterclass on federal appellate practice at Georgetown Law next semester. The course description noted it would focus on building compelling legal arguments through thorough research and factual accuracy. Every law student in America caught the subtext, a masterclass in everything Dershowitz had just failed to deliver. Within hours, the course was oversubscribed by 400%. Students from Harvard, Yale, Columbia, and Stanford requested permission to audit. The waiting list included practicing attorneys with 10, 15, even 20 years of experience. Georgetown Law Dean Sarah Mitchell told the Washington Post, "We've never seen this level of interest for a visiting practitioner." Mr. Washington represents a new model of legal excellence, and our students want in. When the course syllabus dropped, it went viral. Law schools across the country made it required reading. It focused on case law analysis, appellate strategy, and what Washington called precision advocacy, the art of building arguments so well-researched and factually anchored that they couldn't be touched. In an interview with Above the Law, Denzel explained his philosophy. This isn't about performance, it's about effectiveness. The law isn't a stage, it's a tool. And tools only work when they're in the hands of someone who knows how to use them. That quote went everywhere. And the impact was huge, systemic, and immediate. Legal hiring partners across the country started asking different questions. Not about Ivy League degrees or academic titles, but about track records, case wins, and client outcomes. Corporate legal departments began reviewing outside counsel based on actual performance, not just polished bios. At one major legal conference, a Fortune 500 general counsel said bluntly, the Washington-Dershowitz exchange was a wake-up call. We've been paying premium prices for prestige. Now we're asking, where are the results? Law firms scrambled to adjust their marketing. No more leading with degrees. Now it was about wins, briefs, and impact. In legal recruitment, the shift was seismic. Top firms that had been laser-focused on the top 12 elite law schools suddenly widened their nets. Regional law schools, public schools, graduates with hands-on litigation experience, all were suddenly in play. One New York partner told Legal Intelligencer, some of our best attorneys didn't come from the top 1%. They came from places no one was watching and brought skills we desperately need. The American Bar Association issued new guidance for lawyers appearing in media. Legal commentary should be backed by verified experience and factual accuracy, especially when discussing the qualifications of other attorneys. No names mentioned, but the message was crystal clear. Then came the full circle moment. 6 months later, Harvard Law School announced its graduation keynote speaker, Denzel Washington. His speech was titled Excellence Through Service, and it hit like scripture. Standing beneath the white dome of Langdell Hall, facing hundreds of new graduates, he spoke not just to a class but to a profession in the middle of a reckoning. The law is not an abstract academic exercise, he told them, his voice heavy with purpose. It's a tool for justice. And the worth of a lawyer isn't in where they studied or who they know. It's in whether they use that tool to make people's lives better. No mention of Dershowitz. None was needed. Everyone in the room knew what this moment represented, that Denzel Washington, once dismissed as a performer with a law degree, was now delivering the keynote at the very institution that had once symbolized exclusion. Dershowitz, who had spoken at these graduations for decades, was notably absent. The standing ovation lasted 4 full minutes, and the ripple effects began immediately. Law schools across the country announced new clinical programs focused on civil rights practice. Harvard Law created a new scholarship, the Excellence in Public Interest Law Award, fully funding students committed to justice work. But the most lasting legacy wasn't in policy. It was in people. In law firms from Chicago to San Francisco, junior associates who had once stayed silent in meetings started speaking up. They came armed with research, with receipts, with a confidence that came from knowing preparation beats prestige every time. The phrase spread throughout the profession, the Washington method, build unshakable arguments, come prepared like your life depends on it, speak with calm authority, and hit with facts. The profession had a new North Star. As for Dershowitz, he faded from the spotlight. He reduced his TV appearances and retreated into academic circles. When asked in later interviews about that night, he simply said, "I learned the importance of doing your research before making public claims." It was the closest thing to an admission of defeat the legal world had ever heard from him. The story of that 8-minute exchange became legend. Law professors taught it as a modern case study in rhetoric, credibility, and courtroom discipline. It was referenced any time someone suggested that a fancy degree mattered more than deep knowledge. Because that night, Denzel Washington didn't just defend his qualifications. He redefined what legal excellence looks like in America, one calmly delivered fact at a time. And for anyone still wondering whether you should ever underestimate someone based on where they went to school or what their resume looks like, well, just ask Alan Dershowitz how that strategy worked out for him. If this story showed you what real legal excellence looks like, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of people who prove that preparation always beats pedigree. Because in a world full of Dershowitzes, we need more Denzel Washingtons, and the courage to speak truth to power when it counts most.